we are the last frontier of the oil and gas industry, with the many discoveries of oil and gas across the continent, from Mozambique to Tanzania to South Africa. We have to utilize that resource for our development as a continent. So that provides an opportunity for us to have a rethink of what investments we need, what infrastructure we need to put in place to ensure that we can integrate our oil and gas resources into our development efforts. So this session, we're really going to explore the opportunities that exist to develop infrastructure, the policy challenges that need to be addressed for us to be able to do so, and perhaps look at how we finance the required infrastructure, and also critically, how do we optimize perhaps the existing infrastructure within our continent for the development of oil and gas sector. I am privileged to have three important personalities who will help us address the question. And the first I will introduce is my co-host, Mr. Ofosu Dote, who is the founder and senior partner of AB and David Africa, a Pan-African law firm with offices in 5 countries and a network of firms in total of 24 African countries. His experience cut across 2 decades of advisory role on project finance, the power sector, public policy reforms, and public-private partnership, and numerous infrastructure transactions. It has been described as highly regarded in the IFLR 1000 2020 and highly esteemed figure who earns recognition for his diverse commercial practice by Chambers Global 2020. In addition to law, Mr. Dote holds a master's degree in public administration and in applied business research. He is also a fellow at the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport UK. He has served on the Governing Council Association of Ghana Industries between 2013 and 2014. He had a distinction to serve as a committee member of the National Competitiveness Council of Nigeria as a non-Nigerian member. He's also an executive of the Afro Champion organization, which has spearheaded several Pan-African private sector initiatives, including the private sector $1 trillion Africa Investment Framework for Africa, now adopted by the African Union. Mr. Dote is also a co-author of a recently published After Year Zero report on country commitments and readiness for after, and that really indicates that he's well-versed to participate in this. The second speaker or panelist I would introduce is Ms. Chikovia Scott, the General Manager of Commercial and Business Development of the West African Gas Pipeline Company Limited, WAPCO, office based in Accra. She has 18 years of experience in both the technical and business and commercial function, with degrees from Florida A&M University in chemical engineering and MBA from Rice University. She has held positions in or related to the oil and gas industry, including process and facilities engineering and consulting and investment banking. Within Chevron, Ms. Chikovia has held various positions over the last 13 years in the commercial and business development space within midstream and finance and upstream. Additionally, she helped to drive Chevron's digital transformation as a team member, then the GM of the digital innovation and acceleration team to develop strategy and accelerate innovation across Chevron. Currently, she's providing commercial business development and strategy planning leadership for WAPCO. Thank you very much, Chikovia, for joining us. The last person I would introduce is Dr. Andrew Amanpa, an investment banker with over 20 years managerial experience as a director at the ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development, and currently the treasurer, and also in charge of resource mobilization in the bank. Prior to joining the bank, he worked for 3 years as Secretary General Ghana as the head of structured finance, 10 years on Wall Street as Vice President and Client Service Manager in the structured finance at the Bank of New York, and 4 years at the Vanguard Group as a financial analyst / report trader. He has a doctorate degree in business administration from the SBS Swiss Business School, Zurich, Switzerland, 3 master's degrees, and a Bachelor of Science honors degree. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are the personalities who are going to help us deal with the challenges we have in providing the needed infrastructure, and also give us strategic pathway for developing Africa's oil and gas resources for the benefit of our people. Perhaps I will start with Chkovia, and ladies first, because you are perhaps in a much strategic position to tell us what works and what doesn't work, because you already have a regional infrastructure, the West Africa gas pipeline, and to give us your brief understanding of how infrastructure works, what we need. You may want to infuse into some of the challenges that confront WAPCO as a manager and operator of a regional infrastructure, so that it provides learning into the future and thinking through what we need to do to be able to optimize the development of oil and gas resources.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Good day, everyone. And to all of our distinguished guests, thank you so much again for the opportunity to speak with you all today. As an open access pipeline, we have supply in both Nigeria and Ghana, and we have offtake in both, in Benin, Togo, and as well as Ghana. And our whole vision is to ensure a common goal of transporting safe and reliable gas to the countries in which we operate. And this is to ensure that we have those growth opportunities that the speaker Patina had just mentioned, and ensuring that you have that collaboration across the countries. And even in the time of COVID, we have been able to safely work across those borders because of the great stakeholder management we've had working in those different communities, working with the ministries to ensure that we're maintaining that reliable flow that I mentioned before. And looking at different projects that we can undertake as well. And with one of the speakers here from ECOWAS, we continue to work with ECOWAS as well. How do we continue to expand and integrate these projects? The other thing that I think is really key is the stakeholder management with not only the ministries and the shippers on the line, but the off-takers, to ensure that you're collaborating on any type of maintenance activities, outages that may occur, any type of cross projects that can be worked on, to integrate those projects to make sure that they're more efficient in the way that they operate, as well as a way to maintain competitiveness, right? Through a cost-effective type form of energy that's going across all of the countries that I mentioned, and hopefully beyond. So I look forward to discussing how our history of collaboration and the regulatory policies that were put in place across the 4 countries in which we operate, as well as managing those different stakeholder companies as we are a joint venture, can hopefully show how this can continue to improve, not only for WAPCO, but for the acronym that she mentioned, AfCFTA, is definitely a mouthful, but I do think that there are different opportunities and ways that we can learn and grow from one another, as well as look at some of not only the growing pains, but also the successes that WAPCO has had. We've just celebrated our 10th year of commercial operations, and we are a safe and reliable company. We have work hours of over 9 million work hours of safe work hours since I believe it was 2014-ish or somewhere around that. Don't quote me on that exact date, but because the focus is making sure that we are that reliable partner, and that includes safety, not only for our employees, but in the countries in which we operate, the communities in which we operate, because we want to look at this as a partnership. And so I can't emphasize enough the need for collaboration. Benjamin, back to you.
Thank you very much, Chkovia. I may be staying with you again on maybe pinning down some of the specific challenges that we need to resolve, for such an infrastructure to be optimized for the benefit of the people. If you can stay on that and maybe highlight some of the key challenges that comes in terms of, the kind of collaboration that you need to have with state parties, ministries, departments, supply, off-takers in the space. What are the key challenges that we need to resolve for such an infrastructure to be functional?
Well, I think there's a few things. One is to continue to have open communication to ensure, for there's been a lot of historical things that have occurred on our line, as well as even outside of our control, but it's more of how do we engage with the ministries, with other companies, to let them know what we're capable of. We have cross-functional, I should say multi-directional flow, which we didn't have at the beginning of our inception. We didn't envision having a second supply source from Ghana, and we have that now. And so there's different ways for us to really move beyond where we've been. And we were even challenging our own employees with that as well. That's been our big push from a strategy perspective, is not just kind of sitting on our hands and just staying pat, but how can we grow? Where's this growth mindset to collaborate with others to ensure that we maintain viability, but also competitiveness, as I mentioned. We want to ensure that we are the partner of choice, not only for the ministries, but for the different companies. We're looking to expand into the industrial market, for instance. That isn't something that we envisioned at the beginning of this project, but how can we start to do that now? And a lot of that means engagement. So my team, we work a lot with our corporate affairs team, and we plan to do that even more heavily in the future to ensure that we're getting the messaging out. I think the other thing that has been key is the regulatory environment that all 4 of the WAPP states agreed upon at the beginning. You can imagine trying to operate a pipeline having 4 different regulatory regimes if that was the case. Fortunately, through a committee of ministers from each of the 4 countries in which we operate, we have a regulatory body called WAPA, which is the West African Gas Pipeline Authority, that regulates our line to ensure that we maintain that open access and work together to ensure if there's any growth opportunities, or if there are any issues. Of course, there's going to be challenges and things that we have to overcome, but how do we work together to ensure that? So for instance, I mentioned earlier about collaboration on maintenance projects and things of that nature. There are times of the year where it's very important that our line is full and running to, our fullest capacity to ensure that there aren't any outages in any of the communities that we supply. And so making sure that we have that kind of cross collaboration is very important for us to maintain that view, as well as to grow that opportunity for us to be the partner of choice. I think the other thing that's very important is having a common vision, making sure that that vision is bought into by everyone at the beginning, as well as looking at the right legal framework. Again, we have those challenges of having 4 different countries, different tax regimes, et cetera. However, that was all harmonized through some fiscal policies and incentives at the very beginning, so that we don't have to have all of those different types of engagements for different things. So having that agreement between those ministers across the WAPP states has been instrumental for us. But, again, there's a lot of stakeholder management. I will not sugarcoat that. That is something that we have to continue to maintain. We have to get better at that. And I think also it's a way for us to really harmonize the view externally. Benjamin, we've talked about this before as well, was, people didn't even know that we had that expansion and had the multi-directional flow. So how do we get that message out so that others know what we're capable of? The other thing that we talk about, my team collaborates a lot, not only with the corporate affairs team, but also our operations, is just because it's been a no in the past, how do we get to a yes in the future? How do we figure out ways to partner with others for investment, to grow the pipeline, to have more interconnections, to show how we can be not only the primary supply, but also at times backup as well. So having that flexibility, I think, is very important. Making sure that you are staying in tune with the market and what is actually happening we're switching from an access code to what we're calling the WAPI network code. And that will help us to offer more services, to be more flexible, and hopefully allow our customers, our shippers, to actually be able to really kind of trade and really understand some different opportunities that they can then embark on, again, to hopefully increase the utilization of the line, but also look at different ways for growing that offtake. I think the other thing is of showing that you are a safe operator. That is very key. Having that reputation of safe operations and operational excellence is very important. And I think the other major thing that you have to have a common vision on is the business case. You have to understand the supply and demand drivers for each country. So although we have a common framework from a legal perspective, there are different market dynamics within each of those countries that we operate in. And understanding that and making sure that you are flexible to their needs, and looking at it again as a partnership of how can we do this together? How do you look at that investment together? I think is quite important, and some of the challenges that can really be overcome with that. And then of course, from a government perspective, making sure that the government is creating an enabling environment for the private sector to thrive. We are owned by 6 different companies. We're a privately owned company, and we work with our shareholder companies, which includes Shell, Chevron, NMPC, VRA, among others. And how do we collaborate with them to learn from them? But also, we want to kind of be that liaison between those private companies and our relationships that we have with the ministries to ensure that there's an environment for them to invest and grow.
Thanks so much. And I see the collaboration coming up so strongly that we need to understand that we're working together in developing some of this infrastructure and ensuring that all the parties are on the same page on that, ensuring that the integrity of the infrastructure is also intact, to maintain the confidence in the business. And these are very important insight into what we need to do. And in working together, we have to make things easier also for the investment community. Mr. Dr. I will come to you, but I want to go to Dr. Amanpa and pick his thought broadly on where he sits within the AfCFTA, what opportunities he think that from the finance perspective, it will be important for us to focus on broadly before I even come with some specific questions on that. Dr. Amanpa, if you can come in. I think you're on mute. Dr. Amanpa, we cannot hear you.
We cannot hear him.
Okay.
We still cannot.
We still cannot. So we will sort that out. But then I will go to Mr. Fusidote to really take us through some of the challenges that, you have seen big ticket negotiations across the continent, and you understand the context around the politics, navigating the difficult legal regimes within the space to allow some of this infrastructure to actually take off. Can you give us a background on how you see us navigating some of the challenges within the terrain to ensure that we can still be able to build the needed infrastructure and provide the environment needed?
Thank you. To begin with, I think the major challenge, for want of a better word, has nothing to do with oil and gas, but it poses the biggest challenge to our ability to exploit the resources, so to speak. And the biggest challenge is perhaps Africa's inherent disunity, so to speak. It may look not so obvious on the surface of it as to how it affects our ability to develop our infrastructure generally, and particularly oil and gas infrastructure. But it becomes very clear once you begin to drill down Just to give you an example, if you take a look at all major international events where decisions are made, you will find that the European Union operates as one. And therefore, you go to G20, and G20 is actually 19 countries and not 20 countries. A lot of people miss that because the EU is considered as one, and it's the same as G8. But if you come to Africa, you will see that we have everything individualized, and we are unable to negotiate as one, even though the AfCFTA essentially has among its objectives the ability to negotiate as one and as a common bloc. So hopefully we will achieve that. And perhaps no better example will illustrate this than the might of India and its collaborators to have been able to negotiate in the COP26 to essentially, want for better word, water down the resolution regarding phasing down as against phasing out the coal as an input to the energy transition. So if we could come together, that would be very significant. And the clearest example it was my co-panelists have already presented, which is the WACP or the West Africa Gas Pipeline through from Nigeria to Ghana, and the examples and lessons that we learned regarding having 4 major countries create all these common regulatory framework to be able to have uptake across the pipeline. And if we could have a situation where other countries all the way to Sierra Leone and Senegal would join that open access pipeline, it also would then enhance the ability to have the West Africa power pool function properly, because then gas to power and the cost of price of gas as an input to power industry then becomes critical. And then, of course, for this to function, you need to look at the marketing opportunities, because even with the West Africa gas pipeline, one of the very clear things that I think we need to deal with has to do with the cost of gas itself. And there have been previously challenges relating to the cost buildup of gas, and I'm sure the speaker from WACP is better positioned to talk about it. But the key thing to me is that if you take gas as a component of the development of power, and in order to achieve this policy, what we need to do is to have either a regional economic commission-based policy or a multi-country-based policy that enables us to determine the cost of gas in such a way that it is cheaper and aimed at enabling industrialization. If we don't achieve that, and we allow the cost build-up to stay as it is or do not go down, then we are not going to achieve the goal. But how do we do that? We can only do that if we relate it to AfCFTA in terms of ensuring that oil and gas are part of the 90% in the basket of goods and services that will be liberalized over the 5-year period. So the interlinkages between these are very key in order to achieve the goal of building infrastructure as a base, because once that is done, then it links not just the infrastructure development, but the demand at the end product. And it is the demand that will drive in the investments. I think the last point I want to make, and I believe there will be opportunity to go more into this, is to ensure that we have a regime that drives independent operators over the continent, because it is this independent operation, and again, WACP is a very good example of it. And UNOC, linking Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya, is also an emerging example. It is the independent operation, as well as quote and unquote independent regulation, that will enable private sector be able to put in the money. And without that, if governments continue to interfere and each having the multiple policies and tying every single thing to budget and revenue generation in the short term, it will be difficult to achieve the multi-country infrastructure. So those are high-level policies that I think we should be thinking about, and we can drill down as the discussion goes along.
Yes, Mr. Duterte, thank you very much. I think you highlighted a very important point about Africa's disunity. And I think you were coming back with a solution on having a regime that is independent to facilitate investment. So we have an example in WACPA, right? Can we draw some lessons with those structures, and what kind of maybe some gaps that we need to fill to make such independent authorities much more functional and effective? Because you see the challenges here and there, even though we have that kind of body to actually facilitate the operation of the infrastructure?
I think it's a couple of key drivers. One is the question of resource nationalism, which may be a bit hidden regarding who owns the resource and the controls they will want to put over the resource. And if we can deal with that and let resource owners understand that if you have a kind of open access system like you have in WACP, then it is not just a single resource owner piping this gas through the system. Or if you take UNOC, not just Uganda and Total Energy owning it, but the fact that the investors have to get their money back, and therefore the consumers are equally very important. And again, having an uptake in Benin, Togo, Ghana, etc., and having a reverse flow is a typical example of the lessons we can learn. The other thing we need to do is to ensure that there is a model law which each country can actually municipalize, and that's exactly what happened on the West Africa gas pipeline. So you find that in each country, I think Ghana's law must be at 581 if my figures are right, where you municipalize each country's legislation, and it deals with things like what you can put duty on, what you can put VAT on, what refunds can be given depending on the investments you make, etc. And these things become very important. I think the other lesson we need to learn, and for me that is very, very key, is to understand the needs of Africa, especially as it links to not just the AfCFTA, but the entire Agenda 2063. Let me just give you an illustration that is often lost on us. The entire installed capacity of power, and I know, and I'm trying to show the relationship between gas to power as a whole in this. The entire installed capacity of power in Africa is 154,000 megawatts. That is less than the installed capacity of power in Spain. You cannot have a continent which wants to industrialize, whose 1.27 billion people have access to power, which is less than that of, for want of a better word, a small country in Europe. Now, to open the system up, you can only do it when you have a multi-country approach and learn the lessons and say that I'm the owner of the resource, but it is important that we open the resource in order to get the markets, in order to drop the prices, in order that we can industrialize. And that's the way we have to look at it. And without that, it will just remain a mere resource. And this illustration is not too difficult to understand. Most resource-rich countries in Africa, if not all, are also poor. How do you have a situation where you have huge reserves of oil and gas, but you are poor? It's because you are only exporting raw materials and the price fluctuation of commodities affect you. But if you could do it at a multi-country level and build the infrastructure, then you can add value to it, then you industrialize. For example, the linkage between oil and gas and salt, and the ability to produce chlorine, caustic soda, even fertilizer, it's enormous. And if you take West Africa as an example, the resources are all here. But lack of ability to coordinate our efforts, let each of us develop separate policies and we work across purpose against each other and have the spaghetti effect that has been referred to by an earlier speaker. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Thank you so much. I think I will come back later to you. I mean, you paint a picture that requires urgent action. And maybe when we come back, how we develop that urgent action, either through the AfCFTA or maybe through existing frameworks along some of the WACPA structures, and also linking to the rest of the continent. I mean, how do we drill down on the urgent steps that we need to really take to be able to address these infrastructure needs and policy challenges that we do have? I'll try again with Dr. Amanpa, if you can now come in.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Oh, brilliant. Now I can hear you. Yeah, so Dr. Amanpa, I was trying to get you to come in with a perspective from the bank. I mean, how do you see the oil and gas industry, where you sit as a financier, and what the AfCFTA can do to actually facilitate infrastructure development?
Many thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think being the last speaker has given me the advantage to rehash some of the thoughts by my earlier speakers. I would just want to pass a few introductory comments, which will lead me to the opportunities that have been created by the African Continental Free Trade. And then I'll zip through to the challenges and what we as development finance institutions can do, and also some policy issues that we have to deal with. And I would like to start by saying that the oil and gas and mineral resources account for more than 75% of Africa's exports. However, only a small fraction of these resources are traded on the continent, with almost everything being exported beyond the continent. Africa's failure to be competitive on the global market has been compounded by the fragmentation of its markets. The establishment of the Africa Continental Free Trade aims at overcoming this hurdle and creating the largest single market in the world by membership. The African Continental Free Trade purposes to increase intra-African trade and create value for participating countries. This includes trade in energy, including oil and gas. Boosting inter-African trade will contribute to Africa's economic recovery, and Africa needs to trade with Africa in order to increase the continent's competitiveness in terms of global trades. I will just highlight on a few opportunities that the African Continental Free Trade has actually presented to us. It has presented to Africa opportunity for African oil and gas producers to look within the region for trading partners. Development of oil and gas, refining and processing infrastructure is the next logical step, given that it will lead to price reduction, and as a result of the reduction and elimination of import tariffs. The final advantage that I would also want us to look at is the local production and the processing and refining of oil and gas will lead to increased job creation across producing economy. I think Dr. Patina talked about the Africa, the growth of Africa and the population dynamics. While the African Continental Free Trade is a necessary condition for the transformation of African economies, it is not a sufficient one, especially in a world where trade has been largely driven by manufactured goods with increasing technological content. Investment is needed to develop the continent's oil and gas reserves for industrialization and power generation. Inadequate credit lines to facilitate oil and gas trade in the sub-region is also a big challenge. And one may ask, what are some of the strategies that could be fashioned to address these challenges? There should be a conscious development of oil and gas refining and processing capacities to reduce the export of crude oil and the import of refined products. Construction of oil and gas pipelines to trading partner economies to reduce transportation costs and final product prices are two strategies that I would like to throw out there for the time being. And now let me conclude by looking at what we regional banks can do towards the development of oil and gas and the African Continental Free Trade. We can support the development of refining capacity through innovative funding mechanisms. This is an area where I believe development funding institutions, such as Africa Development Bank, the West Africa Development Bank, ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development, Trade and Development Bank, Development Bank of South Africa, Africa Finance Corporation can play a meaningful role. We can also extend credit lines to facilitate the sub-regional trade in oil and gas. Afreximbank, which is the African Export Bank, with their extensive experience in trade finance facilitation, can play a key leadership role here. The creation and deployment of very innovative digital platforms that would boost intra-regional trade and investments by revolutionizing cross-border payments and improving access to quality trade information is another key thing that we can do. And this initiative, I can say that AfroZimbank had led the way with the introduction of the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. The Pan-African Payment and Settlement System should allow the UEMOA countries or the CMAC countries to trade with other African countries in the CFA without having to search for foreign currency. The facilitation of payments of cross-border trade in African currency will definitely mitigate the liquidity constraints that we face. I think my senior brother, David, also talked a little bit about policy, and I think that is one of the areas that he is more expert than me. But two policy enablers that I want to throw out there are a consideration of single obligor limits. Given the nature of the oil and gas industry, there must be policy consideration regarding lending limits as it applies to other industries. These limits should be waived on a case-by-case basis in the oil and gas industry so that local and regional banks can participate in the industry. Because many times where we have large oil projects, you have all the takers being foreign dominated banks. And then the last policy issue that I want to throw out there for discussion is to reduce the cost of borrowing through a downward revision of the policy rate. Mr. Moderator, these are a few thoughts that I think will set the stage for the panel discussions and follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amanpa. I think you really has highlighted some of the things we need, some of the infrastructure we need, and not just that, but also introduce a dynamic to it, a capacity of the financing institutions to also support the financing of these projects. Are there processes already in place to really engage around how you collaborate? I hear you say that you're setting up the payment systems to allow settlements, cross-border settlements to happen seamlessly. But do you have conversations ongoing? And how do you even fit into discussions around AfCFTA to ensure that you can quickly step in to ensure that these infrastructures can be developed?
Yeah, one of the hats that I wear at EBIT is the head of resource mobilization, where I deal extensively with all the global heavyweights to actually pool resources together to finance projects in Africa. I would not like to throw out names, but I can assure you that I am dealing with almost all the big players in Europe and Asia and the Americas as far as pooling resources together to undertake big projects in West Africa region, where our mandate actually spans the 15 ECOWAS countries. And as we speak, we are in collaborative discussion with some of our partners in Nigeria, actually to support a huge infrastructure project in Nigeria. We have also partnered with AfroZimbank, which is the Africa Export-Import Bank, in huge infrastructure projects also in our area of operation. So I would say that there is a lot of things going on the ground, which would help us to actually enhance our ability to actually accrue the benefits of the African continental free trade.
Thank you. But maybe just to stay there again, within that context, are you seeing some risks that we need to resolve in financing some of these projects, which may require a policy shift to ensure that some of these risks to financing projects can be eliminated or reduced, if you like? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things we see is preparation, how prepared our local projects are. So this is one area where the development finance institutions actually spend a lot of efforts actually to help the local promoters to bring the projects to a state of bankability before we even consider engaging the foreign partners. So this is one of the things that we do actually to actually package what we are doing properly.
Thank you very much. At this stage, I want to tell our participants that you can put your questions in the chat box and I will read it out. I will also pick some few questions quickly so that we can use that to feed into the conversation as we progress. But I will go to Chicovia again to see where the opportunities are, for your infrastructure within the context of the AfCFTA, to see if you have expansion programs that you're thinking about, and how do you navigate the challenges that we are highlighting here to ensure that you will be able to develop that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the question. Yes, one of the things that we embarked upon this year as a part of our business planning and strategic review is to look at some of those opportunities. And we really wanted to expand the aperture to look at what are the things that we haven't done that we thought that we couldn't do, but we will look at doing now. And I think the biggest part is the industrial market. And we are working with those in the Tema and Takoradi area within Ghana to see if there are potential interconnections that we can make there, and the City Gate facility that others are developing, including GMPC. How can we also connect and also provide certain services? The other thing that we're looking at is how do we increase the offtake in both Togo and Benin? We can expand our stations in those areas. We have our metering stations in both of those locations that are kind of limited, particularly in Togo, but we can expand those operations, and we're looking to do that, but we need to have those kind of long-term contracts and commitments from the off-takers and ultimately from the shippers to ensure that we do get that return on investment, as I believe David mentioned about that earlier. And so that requires that deep collaboration, and we're working with several different parties now, even though they may be in early phases of their projects, to see how they can engage with us. And that also includes in Nigeria. There's some more development that's happening offshore, and we know that we're not utilizing all of our resources to its fullest capacity. And even beyond that, we can increase our compressor capacity, for instance, in Nigeria, and looking at having potential offtake within Nigeria. Right now, we just have the supply and it flows across to the other countries, as I mentioned. How can we also distribute within the country of Nigeria, which we haven't done before? Right, so it's really looking at that expansion mindset, that growth mindset of what can we do to continue to grow the pipeline, and looking at the opportunities with ECOWAS, the Nigerian to Morocco pipeline, for instance. That is something that we are heavily involved with as well, especially from the technical side. We participated in some technical meetings earlier this year. And our commercial teams are also looking at this to ensure that we will have the right framework in place to enable us to have that type of operation. Because if we do expand, we do need to have the support of the ministers across the 4 states currently, as well as WAPA. And keeping them involved and keeping them aware of those type of activities that are on the horizon, I think will help eliminate any challenges as we get closer to fruition. The other that we're looking at is the opportunity to potentially flow through Burkina Faso. There are a number of different opportunities around West Africa that our line, as has been said before, is kind of the blueprint of how you can do this. So how do we start to branch off from the 4 countries where we are now to these other endeavors that I've mentioned? And the one other thing that I want to mention as well is, again, thinking outside the box, right? How can we maybe have some compressed natural gas stations within the facilities in Ghana and transport that by different means to other countries, as far out as, as far as you can imagine, through trucking, through different type of trading mechanisms. There's a host of things that we could potentially do that's outside of the original mandate that we are pursuing. And so that requires that collaboration, as I mentioned, not only with potential shippers and off-takers, but the ministries, WAPA, and our shareholders. We do a lot with our shareholders to learn from how they are enacting certain growth opportunities, as well as ensuring that we have that operational excellence, that system reliability, making sure that our employees are trained in every way that they need to be, and making sure that we're efficient so that we can drive down our costs to have that competitive tariff. And I think David had mentioned, the pricing and the costs. We have to find ways to bring that down, and that is one thing that we can have some influence on, from the standpoint of, as we get more shippers on the line, more flow going through the line, it will be easier for us to get a return that can then potentially lower that tariff. And something else to mention regarding the tariff, this is, again, a regime that was helped establish through WAPA, so that all the countries can agree with that. And we will continue to expand upon that if we then proceed into other countries. And the way that we have the structure is that we have them in tariff periods, in 5-year increments. And we're on our 3rd one right now. And within that 5-year period, the tariff doesn't change outside of inflation, and I think is indexed against CPI. And the other mechanism by which it could potentially change is if we don't reach a minimum revenue threshold to ensure the viability of the line. But that gives some certainty to the ministers and to the customers about what we'll be doing in the next 5 years through that TP3 period, I should say, and as well as having an idea of what are the different things that we can look at for the next period as well. So as we bring on more resources to be transported through the line, of course, that's a way for us to lower that tariff potentially. And so we look at a number of different opportunities, but I think the ones that are probably most promising are the ones through ECOWAS, as well as tapping into the industrial market. I think those are some of the near and mid to long-term opportunities that we're focused on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Scovia. And I think you addressed some of the issues Mr. Dote highlighted, with the market, bringing down the cost of gas. And from what I'm hearing, if we're able to expand the market, that increases throughput and also impacts the tariff. So that, for me, is another important point that we need to highlight. But if I should come back to you, Mr. Dote, on the point I raised earlier, Scovia is saying that they have to expand, they have to increase their throughput to ensure that, some of the concerns you had about the market and the price can come down. Regulation is extremely important, and eliminating some of the bottlenecks with policy. I see on the chat box people raising concerns about, corruption and its impact on how policy evolves in our context. How do we navigate that to ensure that we can expand the market, develop the infrastructure, have the regulatory system that really work for us to be able to develop the infrastructure required?
I think I hinted on that initially in my first comment, that the more we harmonize our approach to regulation and policy making, the better it is. AfCFTA is leading a similar example in a different sector, but it illustrates what I'm talking about, where you create a model based on the UNCITRAL guide as to how a regulatory framework should look like, what the regulator should do, what it cannot do. And each country of the 55 African countries can adopt or adapt this based on this municipal context, and then there's a general guide. So that's one way we can do that. And I think the West African gas pipeline is a very clear example of that. But there are a few points which, if you give me a couple of minutes, I need to illustrate, because they all come back to the regulatory framework. You cannot have infrastructure that supports the oil and gas industry without looking at transportation, which is what Chikobia was talking about initially. But the transportation ought to be looked at a very, very broad angle. One is that of the sea-going vessels, because as she said, even if you want to transport products from one country to the other, currently Africa doesn't have any liner vessels whatsoever. And by liner vessels, I mean vessels which are scheduled to move from one port to the other. So the average vessel operating within Africa goes to Europe and comes back to Africa, making the cost of transportation very high. So if you want to even do LNG and you want to say you've done an LNG plant in, let's say, Teman, and you want to send it to another West African or East African country, essentially you will have challenges unless you are using charter approaches. And then if you look at transportation inland, including pipelines, as Chikobia was talking about, if we do it very well, we may have the ability to have people be able to now consume at the household level. And once you are using gas as an example at the household level, which is a cleaner energy, you end up relying less on charcoal and wood-based approaches, which end up benefiting us and helping us achieve the net zero effect. So we have to look at it from that broad perspective. And I think there's an important point that we tend to lose sight of anytime we look at oil and gas infrastructure and COP26. We tend to think that COP26 requires an immediate end to the use of oil and gas resources. There's a transition. If we are talking about 2050, investors should be looking at how do we ensure that within that life cycle of the project I'm investing in over that period, I can nevertheless maximize the advantage of this finite resource without necessarily damaging the environment. And if we take that approach, that's how the regulatory framework should shape it. So you find that the regulation directly ensures that you utilize the resource at the same time within the confines of COP26. So that's one point. Another point worth making is what Dr. Amanpa was talking about, and I want to take it a bit further. That has to do with how we tap into the availability of finance to be able to invest in that sector, and particularly in the infrastructure that to support this sector. 130 trillion is supposed to be available for clean investments, but at the same time, Africa must invest in its, own sector. And two things are very, very important there. One has to do with relating the investments to local spend. If we do not relate the investments to local spend, we may still invest in the sector, and you will find that 75% of all our investments would then end up being exported from the oil and gas sector. And once you do that, you realize that the challenge of a continent which is always finding it difficult to have the dollar creates a backward linkage into the wider economy. So you have to do that by looking at how do we cooperate among ourselves as countries in order to ensure that whilst investing, we are not dollarizing the African economy. And it's not too difficult to do that. Incidentally, in February 2020, the African Union adopted a resolution, I think Article 34 or so of the resolution, that the $1 trillion investment framework, and for full disclosure, I'm a co-author of that $1 trillion framework, but it is adopted by the African Union at the heads of states level, which seeks, among other things, not only to drive investments, but also to ensure that the investments do not have a backward linkage of bloating public sector debt and making all the money leave Africa. So you will find that a simple thing like what Dr. Amanpa talked about payment systems platform promoted by AfCFTA, is an opportunity for Africa to say, how do we harmonize our payment systems? How do I buy something in Kenyan shillings and nevertheless have somebody in Zambia receive kwacha all across the continent if I'm building an infrastructure? It will only happen when you have a payment platform that enables us not only promote local spend, but ensure that when we are investing in oil and gas and creating pipelines across the continent, we can still trade in our currency. Otherwise, what we are simply doing is dollarizing it. And at the end of the day, it has a backward linkage, bloat public sector debt, and then we come back with all the the challenges. So these things are very, very much interlinked, and we need to look at it that way. I mean, and let me conclude on this. I gave the example of Spain having the same or about the same amount of what do you call it, power in terms of megawatts of power as Africa. Incidentally, a lot of it is driven by export of gas from Algeria. Algeria exports a huge amount of gas to Spain. Why don't we have that across other African countries? So you will find that whereas cost of power in Africa is on average between 13 cents to 32 cents per kilowatt hour, the average number of countries we want to compete with are selling the gas between the power between 2 cents to about 4 cents or 6 cents at most per kilowatt hour. And power is a major component of industrialization and the products we produce. So we ought to really think as a continent, integrate these things in building the infrastructure and utilize our resources within the energy transition framework. Otherwise, we're going to remain a poor continent, notwithstanding our being resource rich.
Thank you very much. And I think, Mr. Dote, there are questions that really requires more from you at this point. I mean, the points you're making about developing the infrastructure, the frameworks, ensuring that we have transportation, it has to be leadership on this conversation.
Yeah.
And where is the leadership going to come from? And that's somebody's question. So if you can tie that into your points.
I don't think it's a difficult one. I think one of the challenges we have as a continent is passing resolutions and not implementing it. And that's why sessions like this are very good. And again, I may have to give an example. I've been part of this process. I mean, bringing businesses together through Afro Champions to Addis Ababa to get them involved in the discussion for the formative years of the AfCFTA. If businesses and think tanks and the likes of you get involved and find out from the After Secretariat, what are we doing? We've reached 90% or more of the rules of origin. What is inside the rules of origin? What are the basket of goods and services? What is the rules of origin relating to oil and gas exports? When are the tariffs going to be liberalized? How do we prevent major countries from putting it in the sensitive 3% or 7% area? These are the kind of discussions we need to have, and that's where the leadership is. And luckily, the leadership has already adopted a resolution at the continental level. I think the problem actually now is not at the leadership, quote and unquote, but at the followership level, where the likes of your organization like yours should push the leaders to come up with policies at the municipal level to make sure that these things get, because the policies are already there and adopted at the heads of states level.
Okay, so Bernard, if you are listening, we've thrown it back to you. You have to be involved and help us push for that leadership that is required. Chkovia, I would come to you. I think some people, you mentioned that you want to expand even in Nigeria. Maybe that will address somebody's concern about why Nigeria has a lot of gas and they still have challenges. So maybe, Amina, you should watch out for WAPCO to push more gas for solving some of the problems in Nigeria. Yes, so maybe a bit more on some of the plans you have that could assure Amina that there are plans afoot to ensure that some of the challenges they have could be resolved by facilitating investment in country.
Yes, so as any offshore development is occurring, of course, there has to be some way for it to get transported, right? I mean, David just talked about that, as far as how do you make it economical to move this across different areas. And one of the things that we are talking to one of those developers who's looking at some offshore fields, bringing on some gas that they need to then transport potentially to other countries because there may be too much gas in Nigeria. However, in the Badagry area, for instance, there are opportunities there that where there could be some offtake in that. And I was reading, some of the questions in the Q&A, and I think one thing that's very important in what we look at across the board, in order to bring everybody to the table, you have to, and this is the old cliche, what's in it for them? You need to really be able to explain what's in it for them, a clear business case, as I mentioned earlier, for every member of the value chain. And the value chain can get quite large, it can get quite complicated, but we do have experience in helping to establish that. And we work with different shippers to kind of help them develop that market and to better understand what those market opportunities are so that we can then jointly go to pursue them. So I think that is really important to ensure that you have that collaboration. And I know I keep using the term collaboration, but that's really the key here, across those different stakeholders and different members of that value chain, is really trying to establish what's in it for them. And so as we look at those opportunities in Nigeria, and as well as beyond, especially as we look at more longer term projects, the Nigeria to Morocco pipeline, for instance, how do you then start to expand upon those different opportunities offshore as well as onshore to ensure that there's offtake, to ensure that there's transport even across to Togo and Benin, and maybe going north, as I mentioned earlier, to Burkina Faso. So we're looking at it holistically. If we look at these projects in isolation, I think we'll miss the boat. And that's why we try to bring together, we're almost kind of the middle person, right? We try to bring those different groups together because we're a transporter. We don't produce gas, we don't refine it, but we are a transporter. And so as that transporter, we're in that midstream space where we can bring those groups together to best understand what is the value chain, what is the size of the prize, and how we can help them facilitate and reach their potential as well.
Thank you very much. Dr. Amanpa, maybe I should come up to you now. There are questions coming up on financing some of the initiatives that are happening across the region. Ghana wants to be the hub, a petroleum hub. I see other countries wanting to do the same. Senegal and Ivory Coast also has plans. How do you think through some of these multiplicity of ideas coming up across the region? First, for optimization, is there the need for a conversation around how we plan as a region and sync that with capacity to develop what in what country, prioritizing among these member countries so that we are not investing indiscriminately, but we are strategic in how we invest in the region.
Many thanks, Mr. Moderator. I think there were a few ideas that I could not actually talk to as far as strategies are concerned. I think it is time for us, as Wachovia said, to think more holistically. So there should be a conscious effort to actually continue with this objective of constructing oil and gas pipelines to trading partner economies. And this will actually reduce transportation costs and even the final cost of the project. Also, we should also look at the regulatory regime to ensure that the execution of the intra-Africa trade becomes as seamless as possible. Because unless we do some of these basic things, we will not achieve the optimum which is where we want to go. And then one critical ingredient that we also have to be aware of is that we need to foster the collaboration between research and industry, because this will result in the closing of the region's scientific and technological gap, because whatever you do has to make sense at the end of the day. So these are a few thoughts that I think we could look at as a region who wants to grow together and benefit from the Africa Continental Free Trade. I don't know if I sufficiently addressed the question.
Yes, thank you. At this point, I see hands dropping, which suggests to me that in the course of the discussion, we are answering the questions in the minds of some the participants. But Stella, I see your hands still up, Stella Wilson. Can we let Stella in to ask a question, and then we could.
Stella can talk now if you can unmute yourself.
Stella.
Okay, so I'll move to Clovis.
Okay, so Clovis, you can come in.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good morning. Actually, my name is Clovis, and I'm a student at the Institute of Petroleum Studies, Uganda Christian University. I'm from Cameroon. And of recent, I've attended a series of conferences with regards to the African Free Trade Agreement and the benefits, or the benefits that will accrue from if the oil and gas sector is being included in it. I'm sorry, my English is not so good. I'm francophone. So, but one of the reservations I have had always is that, in as much as we hear of all these opportunities and all that, what is the role of the youths who are new in this industry? Because I've been seeing, of recent, I've realized that in as much as they talk of opportunities and investment, all that huge investments, but the youths are forgotten in this. I was looking for an internship last year, and all the countries that I applied for internships in Africa, I was never given an internship opportunity. And at the same time, when I go to the industries that are operating already, I see foreign workers, foreign skills, and all that. And all we keep hearing is that Africans don't have skills. Africans don't have skills. So how will this benefit the youth? That's what I want to know.
Thank you very much. So maybe, Mr. Fusidote, I want you to know this, though, an advice for the youth in this conversation. Let me permit Stella at this point.
Okay.
Stella, if you can unmute and come in. All right. Okay. I think we're having challenges with Stella. So, Mr. Fusidote, do we have a message for the youth in this conversation? Should it be part of a strategy of building infrastructure and developing the oil and gas industry?
The answer is yes. I mean, incidentally, the AfCFTA itself in the protocol, if you look at the AfCFTA architecture, the agreement, the protocol, and the annexes, it emphasizes in both the framework and the protocols the need to ensure that the youth and women are given a priority role. And again, that's why I referred to the $1 trillion framework, which I said has been adopted by the heads of states as part of the funding infrastructure. If you look at it, for signature projects, which become certified as AfCFTA driven projects, one of the criteria for scoring is the extent to which the value chain involves the youth and the extent to which the value chain involves women. So it's a clear criteria that seeks to operationalize what is otherwise a resolution. And the other thing I think I want to add as a comment in response to that question is that the youth, and especially those who are entrepreneurial, should look more at what are the value chain along each of the corridors that you will have trade moving. And there's a lot of data. I mean, if you look, for example, at the Africa Trade Observatory portal and other studies that have been carried out, you will see how these value chain corridors develop. And you will find that there are opportunities for various aspects for the youth, and they are more better placed than even the, for want of a better word, the elderly in terms of participating in it. So the answer is yes. I'm sure maybe after the session, if he wants to have a further discussion, I'll be prepared to give him pointers as to how he can find resources in this direction.
Yeah, thank you. And Clovis, I think we can have a conversation further even after this summit on some of the.
Benjamin, can I just add one thing to that as well? Just some of the things that we're doing it within WAPCO. We have scholarship programs. We also have community skill acquisition training to help with all of that. And you know, the majority of our employees are African. So I know that I'm not, yeah, but for the most part, all of our employees are. You probably hear my Southern United States accent to know that I'm not African, but you know, we do look into that a lot. We do hire new employees. I know that it's been very challenging because of COVID, but we also work with, I believe it's called National Service, and bring on some students from that every year as well. And, you know, one thing that I also want to, especially seeing that this was a previous role of mine, is really imparting upon all of those who are in school or are thinking about going to school, get your digital transformation skills up. That is so important. And that's a game changer, because a lot of the old heads, so to speak, don't necessarily have that skill set. And we need to make that transition to make sure that we're more efficient, you know, to make sure that we can use those digital technologies to be safer. You know, for instance, you know, using drones to do inspections. That's less people going across, that's less resources that are being used to hopefully help with, you know, lower emissions, as well as looking at preventive maintenance type activities to ensure that we're reliable. So we need people with those type of skills that can come in and kind of bridge the gap. I almost look at it as a translator that can understand. You don't even have to know as much about the oil and gas industry, but if you have that technology focus, how do you translate that into something that can be useful within our industry? And I think that's an area where a lot of youth can really impart upon a lot of knowledge and enthusiasm to an industry that's considered a little bit old and stodgy at times.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Amanpa, do you have something to add on that? And maybe also on points about financing. I think somebody's asking how you integrate the recent environmental governance pressures into financing some of these projects. How do we navigate those pressures to ensure that we can still have projects developed, the regional infrastructure developed?
Yes, many thanks, Mr. Boachi. This is a very important question. And to the questioner, the world is ours, and we owe it a duty to protect it. So I see environmental policies not an obstacle to development, but an enabler to help us to rethink on how we do things so that we could enjoy, as well as future generations would also enjoy, the benefit of this beautiful planet that we have today. So from where I sit, actually, I have extensive relationship with the European partners and even World Bank to make sure that our environmental and social and governance policy complies with international standards, EU standards, World Bank standards, and even the climate accords that have been signed. And for me, I don't see it as an impediment to development or funding, but it actually helps us to rethink and even do things in a better way. And come to think about it, there are even more opportunities coming from global conscious investment vehicles and banks throughout the world who are willing to support socially responsible investments.
Mr. Boachi, if I may come in, are you there?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you. Please come.
Yeah, just a quick one, and this is specifically to, my friend Dr. Amanpa and those who are related to the finance industry. We need a fair amount of, I don't want to call it new thinking, but conscious effort to ensure that we reduce the dollarization impact of the investments we make. And then I'm saying it because I've heard him say a couple of times about partnering with others, which I don't have any problem with. But unless we increase the partnership with the likes of pension funds dotted across the continent, you'll be surprised that the pension fund under management of Nigeria is actually bigger than the GDP of Ghana, Togo, and Benin combined. And these are facts. If you don't actually partner with the likes of these to ensure that when we invest, there is a large amount of local currency, because those who are going to consume will be paying you kwacha, cedi, shilling, naira. And if we have to always convert this into dollars, then we have a challenge. And at the end of the day, we are unable to invest. That's one. Two, we have to ensure that we lobby government enough to ensure that the so-called Africa risk profile, which requires or make these investors require government guarantee, government support, tax waivers, etc., which end up creating what we call debt to GDP ratio. And as a result, governments are unable to borrow, and then the rating agencies drop the rating of governments, and then the private sector has to take the rating of the government. These are the things which end up not allowing the likes of WACP and the rest to build the infrastructure and expand across the continent. I mean, so I think the DFIs like the EcoBank, ECOWAS Bank for International Development, etc., and their partners should be looking a bit at new policies that will not have the backward linkage of preventing us from developing.
Thank you. That's really important, and it actually answers the question as well. At this point, we have to wrap up, and I would let you have your final words. I see some of the questions are for the next panel, and I don't want us to now start, delving into what the next panel will be discussing. So I'll give Chikobia your last words, and then we can wrap up on this.
Thank you. Thank you. So I just want to thank everyone again, and to my esteemed colleagues on the panel. I learned a lot as well as listening to them, and things that I can take back to WAPCO as we start to look at different ways to expand. I think the key is that holistic collaboration, as I mentioned before, making sure that we're seeing the big picture. How can we start to overcome some of those challenges? And David brought up a great one regarding the currency. We face those challenges as well with certain shippers and things of that nature. So how can we find ways to overcome that with the finance community, with others within our industry, as well as the, even expanding beyond through the research. I think Andy had mentioned that with different universities and the research community as a whole. If we start to tackle these things from a holistic view and not be so siloed, and I think that's the challenge has been, a lot of folks have been siloed. How can we look at it as resources for the continent of Africa, not any separate country on its own? I think then you will start to see a lot more of this growth that we have been talking about throughout the panel. So again, just want to thank everyone for listening, for the comments, for the questions, and thank you again for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Govia, and it's been really insightful looking at the issues that you were raising, and the fact that we need to keep collaborating to ensure that we can deliver the infrastructure required. Dr. Amanpa, I want to come to you at this point for your final words.
Many thanks for also having me, and it's a pleasure playing part in this important discussion. I would like to assure David that the idea of even tapping African resources to develop Africa have started already. And I can tell you that we as a bank are even in discussion with Nigeria Pension Fund. I had also gone to South Africa to engage DBSA, that's the Development Bank of South Africa, who are sitting on a pot of cash to see how best we can tap on some of these resources to actually develop our respective countries. And there are also a lot of other good things happening within the banking community, such as the harmonization of standards for the development of quality infrastructure projects in the oil and gas sector in Africa. We are also talking about a trade facilitation fund just to support these Africa continental free trade initiatives. And we are also talking about something that probably I did not get time to talk about, the single trust guarantee system, where the practice of raising cash or bank guarantee or insurance bond in each country of transit would be a thing of the past. So these are all good things that are ongoing, and I believe that we will all be the beneficiaries of these initiatives. Many thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amanpa. Dr. Dotte, your final words?
Thank you, and thank you to my colleague panelists. I've learned a lot. I'm actually quite pleased to learn about this single trust guarantee that Dr. Amanpa just talked about. Quite interesting, something that we've all been worried about in the past. So that's good. I think just in terms of wrap up, it's for me, there is nothing more important than emphasizing the need for us to work together as a continent in order to move forward. And if we do that, and we think comprehensively and in a coordinated manner, there's a lot that we can do. And especially if we also look at our advantages in terms of the energy mix and understand that we are one continent which is also well positioned to be able to promote our geothermal as well as solar and wind space, so that we can still attain the goals of COP26 while developing our hydrocarbons. And lastly, emphasizing unity again. If the example of China and the US, who are almost always fighting, is anything to go by, they issued a joint statement of COP26. I can't see how Africa, through the AU, cannot issue a joint statement when it comes to our oil and gas industry, as well as the infrastructure we need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my esteemed panel. I think it's been really an opportunity for me to learn, and also I'm sure many of the participants have also learned from us. I don't want to bore everybody summing up the whole thing, but I see collaboration coming up strongly. Mr. Dotte's point about, some of us in the think tank space and civil society also picking up where we are and engineering these kind of collaborations to ensure that we can action the plans that we do have to facilitate the investments that Chkovia talks about in the space, because ultimately something has to give for those investments to actually come, and that requires that we action the legal frameworks and the policies that we are developing. I'm happy to also learn what Dr. Amanpa and the colleagues in the financing space is also doing to ensure that they can provide the needed financing for infrastructure development. On that note, I want to thank you very much and hand over to Mr. Makwando, who is just sucking me from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben, and all your panelists. That was a very interesting and insightful discussion. Congratulations to all of you. And distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that has been the panel that talked on bridging the cross-border infrastructure deficit in the oil and gas industry to optimize the gains from the AfCFTA. Thank you very much. And I realize that a number of questions were not answered. As Ben indicated, some of those questions will be deferred to the next sessions. But in case the questions are still not answered, the organizers will get in touch with the panelists who will provide answers and will be that, and those answers will be sent to you via email. So I will entreat people who still have questions and answers to attach your email addresses to your question and your questions, and the organizers will get them, the panelists answer them via personal emails to you. So before we get to the next session, I just want to have asked the moderator just one question. Mr. Benjamin Boachi, I don't know whether you are still on.
Yes, I'm still here.
Perfectly. So I saw you smiling when Mr. David Ofosu-Dotte talked about, Africa working together as one unit, just like China, to be able to optimize the gains of our natural resources as well as AfCFTA. Do you think, it is possible for us to harmonize our interests? I'm just tying it to the next session that talks about harmonizing our local content regulations. But do you think it's possible for Africa as a unit or countries within the continent to harmonize our interests?
No, I think essentially that was the point Mr. Dotte was really talking about. We can't work in silos and achieve anything. We have often agreed, but actioning them has always been a challenge. And he further emphasized that we have to be the gatekeepers. We have to watch and promote that integration of ideas and actions for us to bring the development that we want in the oil and gas sector. So there's no question about it. We need to work together and be extremely deliberate about the need for us to bury our differences, identify the opportunities, and work together as a continent.
That is very interesting. In addition to that, what other things stood out for you as a major highlight throughout the session?
I think the investment can be ready if we have the legal frameworks and the regulations right. And that requires the leadership that all of us have to push for to ensure that we can have seamless agreements established, that doesn't derail investment or risk the investment unnecessarily. And that requires some political commitments across the board, to ensure that we have the framework that activates investment and planning right in a manner that attracts the banks to also put in the funding that is required, and substantially reducing the risks that politics inject into project financing in our context.